A long holiday, right? I think Singapore National Day.
Yep.
Is it in June, July, August? Yeah.
August
Early August.
9th, I think it is.
Yeah. So there
Yeah.
will be no holiday yet.
No. Well, and normally we all go back to the US or Europe, a lot of the expats go back home for the summer. But of
Uh-huh.
course, no one's been able to do that, so everyone's going to be around. So it'll be nice. It'll be
Yeah.
fun.
All
So
right, everybody.
get ready.
All right.
Enough chit
I,
chat. Is that what you're
Okay.
saying?
yeah. All right. I would like to start the session. Yeah. Since
Is
most of the
his Zamri
participants
in?
are. Sorry.
Is his Zamri in? Zamri?
Samri. Sorry.
What's
Hazmi.
Hazmi? Yeah,
Oh,
Hazmi.
okay. He will join in a bit.
Oh,
For
okay.
10, because your
Yeah.
session starts later.
Oh,
A
okay.
bit later. Yeah. All right. A very good morning, mayors, presidents, secretaries, head of department and officers from municipal throughout Malaysia. Our facilitator, Mr. Jeffrey Delmon, Senior Infrastructure Finance Specialist, World Bank, Singapore. Mr. Abhijit Baumik, Public-Private Partnership and Infra Finance Consultant, New Delhi. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth session of the Leadership Training for Municipalities on Public-Private Partnership toward Development of Smart City. Today, our facilitator will provide the second part of how public-private partnership able to create a long-term partnership between municipality and private sector and its benefit. Also touch base on the municipal readiness tool and municipal readiness self-assessment. Now, I would like to hand over to Jeffrey Delmon to conduct the session.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anusha, and welcome back, everyone. I hope you've had a nice weekend and been having dreams about PPP. And now you've come back with lots of questions and lots of new ideas on what to do with this interesting instrument. Today, last time we talked about in the second session, we talked about what these projects look like, what kind of things you can do with them, some of the ideas. This time we're going to talk a little bit about how you as a municipality can make these things happen. What do you need to do differently in order to achieve these kind of projects and develop these kind of projects? We're going to start off with a little bit, I'm going to give you a little bit more lecture, apologies. You're going to hear a little bit more from me about some lessons learned from different places. And again, we'll be relying on this Municipal PPP framework that we've developed, which you guys all have access to. We'll talk a little bit from that, and based on that, what the good lessons learned have been, what's been identified, different ideas, different thoughts. And then we're going to have a panel session. And during the panel, we're going to have people from all different perspectives, giving us some feedback on what they've experienced, what their experience has been developing these kind of projects, the challenges, the opportunities, etc., and then give you a chance for some questions. But first, I wanted to hand back to you, and I'm going to put my slides up. But while I'm doing that, any questions that are outstanding, anything that you've woken up in the middle of the night and thought, oh, I wish I'd remembered to ask that question. What do you have any questions that you would like to raise before we get into this next bit of a lecture? And while I'm doing that, I'll pull up the slides. But please put in the chat any questions that you've got. All right, I'm seeing a whole lot of silence. Is everyone still asleep? Do you have your cups of coffee? Still waking up? Still stretching? Should we do a group stretch? Nothing. Anusha, are you getting anything on text, or should we keep going?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, okay. I'm finally in. I had a bit of a problem getting
Excellent.
in.
Welcome.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
So,
I need to find a bit a better place to kind of put my video. I think maybe I can.
that was a very nice background. The beautiful skies outside.
Yes. So maybe a bit of. Okay. Let's see.
Excellent. So what you'll see in front of you on this chat is a couple of different images just of the panel. There's a whole group of people that are on a separate channel that can all see you and hear you, but you won't be able to see them or hear them. And they communicate with us through the chat function. So even though you only see 3 people, there are like 50 people connected on this other channel, and all mayors and presidents in different roles from across municipalities across Malaysia. And I'm going to do a little bit of a talk for about half an hour, and then we're going to move to our panel. Is that okay? Fantastic. All right, so let me go through these, and I still see nothing on the chat. So clearly everyone understood absolutely everything from the last conversation. You guys know everything you need to know about PPP. So you were just on top of it. No more questions. You know everything. And by the way, there's going to be a test. I don't know if you were warned, but in order to get your special certificate signed by people much more important than me and Anusha, you have to pass a test. I know I didn't want to say it either, but Anusha insisted that you guys love taking tests. She said, oh, they love being tested. So we're going to give you this really difficult test. You're going to have to complete it based on what we've talked about the last couple of days, what we'll talk about today and Thursday. So we'll hand that test out on Thursday. Don't get to peek first. You got to wait until the session's over, then we'll give you that test. And then we've got a follow-up session on the 28th. To talk about, sort of follow up, blah, blah, blah. And so we'll give you the results of the tests by then. Is that right, Anusha? Did I get it right?
That's about right.
Okay, excellent. So we'll hand that test out next time, but that means you all have to pay attention and ask questions. Excellent. And Hazmi, don't forget, if you want to send a chat out, you have to send it out to all participants, right? Yes. Or all attendees. Who do you send it to, Anusha?
You can send to all attendees, or you can also send under the Q&A. Should be fine.
Great. Perfect.
Yeah. Hazmi is sending message, so it should be okay.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to jump straight into this. And as usual, if you have questions, you want to throw anything out there, just let me know. Stop me in mid-flow. It'll be much more interesting if we hear from you and not just listen to me, blah, blah, blah. So let's talk about what we do as a municipality to drive PPP. This is a totally different way of thinking about things, right? For usual procurement, you're buying a thing or you're getting somebody to do something, right? Relatively straightforward. Build me a building if it's complex, or deliver me pencils. That's the sort of the classic procurement model. Here, you are connecting with an investor for a long period of time. Some PPPs are short, like 5 or 10 years, but most of them tend to be 20, 30 years. So this is a long time to engage with this investor. You're going to have to stick with them for that period of time, which means all the work that you do up front is saving you money later. Figure out what you want, how you want it, make everything very clear. And I know I'm going to rehash, and again, apologies for the image, but I'm going to go back to my marriage metaphor. It's just like marriage. How often, when you want to get married, you don't walk out in the street and grab the first person you see and get married to them. What do? You do a whole bunch of due diligence. Your family does a whole bunch of due diligence. Your friends do a whole bunch of due diligence. Sometimes helpful, sometimes not. But everybody is looking at this person and asking questions. And that person's family and friends and everybody else are asking the same questions. And you have long discussions with people. Is this the right person? Is this the right thing to do? Blah, 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 blah. All of that is a really important part of finding the right person and making that relationship work. It's not as simple as just choosing someone and go. Exact same thing with PPP. So, so when you choose your project to do your PPP with, you don't just choose the thing that's the most difficult project that you don't know what to do with. That's what this pyramid represents. The typical approach is that a government has a certain amount of budget. I have to spend this budget this year. So I'm going to take all the projects that I know are easiest and most available, and I'm going to do them. I'm going to spend my money, and then I'm going to get my projects done, and I'll get more budget next year. However, more risky projects are more expensive than when done with PPP. Less risky projects are cheaper when done with PPP because the private investor adds a risk premium, an extra cost, where you ask them to take risk. Where they see a project that has all these challenges, they know that they're going to have to spend money to address those challenges. They're going to have to hire more people. They're going to have to bring people in from the outside. They're going to have to pay for insurance. They're going to have to set money aside, contingency funds, because construction might be more expensive, operation might be more expensive, which means riskier projects are more expensive. When you're looking at it from a public perspective, it's not the way the public budgeting works. You budget the amount that you need for the project, boom. And the cost of money is no different. When the government borrows money for a risky project or when it borrows money for a normal project, generally that all comes out of a central pot of government borrowing. When government issues its treasuries, sovereign bonds, you don't look through to see what projects they're financing. You only look at the government. And so the money out of that that's used to do risky projects or easy projects, same cost, same price. So it makes no difference. So what we need to do is flip this pyramid on its head. When you look at your list of projects, instead of taking the easiest ones and using public money to finance them, the easiest projects should go to private financing because the private financing will be cheaper and it'll be easier to get investors. More competition means the cost of equity is squeezed down. More competition gets you better partners. So you want the easier projects to go out, but this is totally different logic. And you need to change the incentives for the ministry as well. So if the department decides to go PPP and you want them to go PPP, and they decide to go with PPP and use their budget for more difficult projects, you need to recognize that, because another department that ignores private sector and just uses the easy projects for public money will spend more and will meet internal criteria better. So think carefully about where the incentives fit within your budgeting, within your budget allocation systems, and the incentives created internally for rewarding different departments for what they've achieved. If you want private investment, if you want access to new private capital. So the screening tool, and you'll see this little reference in the slides to tool and different modules. That's part of the PPP, the Municipal PPP framework. So you'll be able to refer to those modules to get more information and more thought about these different issues. So there needs to be a screening process. You need to learn how to and identify mechanisms to identify the best projects for PPP, the ones that'll be easiest and fastest and cheapest to finance, and then prioritize within that. So which ones do we want to do first? And for instance, if you have I don't know, a parking garage, let's do water treatment. You want to do little water treatment projects in different parts of the city, and you want to do these on a PPP basis. So you've got 10 projects to do. If you take 10 water projects out to the market all at the same time, the number of investors with the skills and the resource and the funding available to do these water projects is limited. So if you go out with 10 of the same project at the same time, the market can't respond. So you need to feed these projects out to the market as that market appetite is there. We've been doing a lot of debate currently about airports. And during COVID, airports have been slammed because people aren't flying. Airlines and airports are in trouble. Now the question is, if you want to do a PPP in an airport, when do you do that? Do you do it now? Are the investors ready now? Do you do it in 6 months, in 12 months? If you do it now, there's a likelihood that investors will be so nervous about their own lives and their own portfolios back home that they're not going to pay attention to your interesting opportunity in Malaysia. that they'll be more interested in their other and staying alive rather than focusing on your project. So what we're advising is for people to prepare all of this, get it all ready to go, and then test the market, figure out when the market is ready. So that same kind of prioritization. You also need to think about your own skill set. How many people do you have working on this? Say you have a team of 5 people that will be pushing out these kind of projects. If you have 10 projects, these 5 people can't do 10 projects at once. It's way too much work. So you need to think about not only market capacity, but also your own municipal capacity as you're deciding how to prioritize projects. When you're choosing your partner and the investor, make them compete. Private sector is much better when you make them compete. I know it's tempting. All these beautiful people in their beautiful suits come into your office and say, we have a deal for you. We've got this amazing technology. We've got all this amazing experience. Look at our beautiful suits. We drove up in these beautiful cars. We must be the right people to do your project. And it's so tempting to say, yes, let's just go with you. It'll be faster. I don't need to spend, 6 months doing due diligence and 6 months doing procurement. That's a year from now before I get somebody on board. I just want to go now. Let's just go with you. Don't do it. There are a few cases where that works. There are a few cases where you have really good people. They don't want to wait, and they've got a good deal for you, and they want to come in and help you. I would say, from my experience, 90% of those people either don't have the capacity, don't have the money. Some of them are just not nice people, and they're trying to get you to sign a contract, and either they'll sell that contract to somebody else, or they'll make you wait and squeeze you until you pay. Bad experiences all over the world on this, but make them compete. And Anusha, before you jump in, let me throw in one more image for this. I have a daughter, the most beautiful girl in the whole world. She's amazing and lovely. She's only 11, but someday some guy is going to come and want to marry her. Now, she's so amazing that I'm sure there will be a long line of guys. Do I give the first guy that comes to the door? Do I just say yes to him? Is there some benefit in it being the first person to come and ask to marry my daughter? No way. I don't care who's first. I want the very best. I want someone who's going to love her and cherish her and take care of her, that will be wonderful. And so I want to do my due diligence and make them compete. I want to find the best guy for her. And same thing with your project, right? You don't want to just hand it off to whoever. Get the project out of the way so that I don't have to deal with it anymore. Choose the right person. All right, Anusha, tell me, what's our question?
Okay, that's a question from Delmon Leo Lee Peng. Delmon, we have unmuted you. You can ask your question. Okay, anyway, he have typed out the question. Just a question and a concern. Currently, we are on a WHO project called Health City, which we have had adapt and implement since it's very much and all linked to UN SDGs goal focus. It is also similar to the SDG goal that had been set globally. So that is his question.
And that, unfortunately, is a question that I have absolutely no clue. I'm afraid I don't know much about WHO's Healthy. I've heard about it, but I don't know enough to comment on the SDG goals and whether those. So the UN SDG goals are the same ones that have been set globally. Those should be the same. But how the Healthy City project or initiative links in with that, I'm afraid that is way outside. I've done a bit in hospitals, but a long time ago, back when I was in the UK. And I'm afraid I have not worked much in the health sector since then. Done a few little bits and pieces on clinics and hospitals, but just sort of big picture advisory. I've not been really engaged in that. But I tell you what, if this is something that you're curious about, if you send me an email on this, I can poke around and find out. Okay, so let me continue. We talked a little bit about the PPP cycle. And I know this gets, this often creates challenges for cities that are implementing PPP because they want to just dive into it. Another interesting challenge about the difference between traditional procurement and PPP procurement is that, as you'll see in this dynamic, we've got selection and then develop and then procurement and award. So for PPP, we try to do our homework first. We try to test everything and check everything so that we've got a good understanding of the project before you go to market. In public traditional procurement, often we just go to market, right? You get an idea, I want to build a hospital, I know the basics, so let's hire a contractor. You hire the contractor, and then as things evolve or as you learn things, you change the contract and you adjust the construction. Because this is a partnership, PPP doesn't work that way. You want to give all the information to your partner so that they know. And I know it's a bad image, but it would be a bit like marrying somebody quickly and then eventually figuring out what they're like and what you want, and finding out that they want 10 children and you want 2 or something like that. And it's not something that you can adjust later on. Similarly, in a PPP, it's much better to have everything set out in advance. That way you know what you're getting, you know that you have the right partner, and you can, and the likelihood of success is much higher. If you go in too early without having prepared yourself, there's a likelihood that you get the wrong person, that it costs you way too much, that you get wrapped up in something that's not going to deliver, that's not going to achieve the successes that you want. And so we keep going back to this, the project cycle. And it's just really important to follow each of these steps to make sure that you've done the right homework and that you've been able to deliver so that we can get to procurement and award, and again with these competitive processes. And in the framework, you'll find sample terms of reference to hire a firm to help you, what they call a transaction advisor. We've got one for feasibility studies, and then to actually help you prepare the project, take it out to market, find the right partner, get to completion. Got another module that walks through the procurement process, RFQs, which is pre-qualification. So before you've got 30 people that want to bid for this project, you don't want to review 30 bids. You only want the best 5 or 6 firms to bid. This also helps because if a good firm sees that they're bidding against 30 firms, and it's expensive to bid, each one of those bidders has to spend a lot of money to put a bid together. If they see 30 firms, then they're going to think, all right, this isn't worth my money to go and bid. And plus you'll have a lot of those firms that will bid very cheap prices. They may not have very good quality, but they'll bid cheap prices. So the good firms will say, no, thank you, I don't want to touch that. But if you narrow it down to 5, they see their competitive, the competition is closer to what would provide them with an opportunity to show off their quality, to show off their abilities. And then the range of pricing won't be as bad because you've only chosen the best firms to negotiate with. And that's what that RFQ does. Then the request for proposal, which is the bid document. And then we've even got a sample PPP agreement. Now, as always, with these sample agreements, it's not about put your name in the thing and sign it, right? It's all the different thought process and ideas. Look at the footnotes because it explains all the different clauses and just helps you walk through the contract to help you, when your lawyers deliver a draft contract, you can look at it and compare. You can use it to guide the lawyers to help them figure out what exactly they need to put in place for your contract. Now, there's a flip side of this, and we're talking about finding the right partner, which is really important. But just as in marriage, not only do you have to find the right partner, but you have to be the right partner, right? And that's why we all try to improve ourselves. When you want to go out and meet your spouse, right? You're not married, you want to go out and meet somebody. Do you put on old shabby clothes? You don't shower, you don't do your hair, you don't worry about it. I'm just going to go out because this is me. I want people to love me, so I'm going to show me as I am. Of course not. You put on your nice suit, you look good, your best outfit, everything's beautiful, so that when you go out there, people see a beautiful image of you. And in the same way, when you are preparing yourself to go out to the market and engage in negotiations to deliver a PPP, you want those investors to see you as this amazing opportunity. Here's this incredible municipality that really has their stuff together, that really understands the project, that really knows what they're doing, and they're going to be a good partner for me. That's where you get private investors to come and give you good competitive prices, where you get a lot of people coming to bid because they know that the partnership is going to be fruitful. They know it's going to be a success because you are a good partner, they're a good partner. Together, this creates a good PPP, and we're going to deliver the right thing. And so, of course, in our little image, do you want to see our friend on the left, who I'm sure is very nice, but looks very desperate? And is it all shambles? Or do you want to be the guy on the right-hand side who looks beautiful and all kitted out and ready to go? An important part of doing that is the feasibility study. So before we get to the bid, before we get to this list of potential partners, let's ask ourselves a lot of important questions and find out what this project looks like. Test every aspect of it, because the bidders will be doing the same thing. They'll be looking at every bit of data they can get, and they'll be asking difficult questions. And those questions will help them understand different aspects of the project, will help them understand risk and understand the risk allocation. And so each one of these different pieces, and we put the big topics here on the slide, but there are obviously under each one of these topics are a whole series of questions. And again, you'll find that in the tools, in the municipal guidelines. There's one module 4 on feasibility studies that actually walks you through all of those questions so that you know exactly the kind of questions to ask. And the questions will need to be sector specific, but let me give you an example. For technical, I'm working on a road project in Uzbekistan. And Uzbekistan was created during Soviet times, and Stalin mapped it out in this crazy shape in order to split different groups of people apart and create tension within the country so that he could control Uzbekistan. Well, Uzbekistan is now an independent country, but it still has this crazy shape. And there's a string of mountains. And on the other side of the mountains is this big valley where all the agriculture is. Then on the other side of the mountains is the majority of the country, where the capital city and a lot of the big cities are, and a lot of the industrial development. And these mountains are enormous, and you have to drive up and over this pass to get down to the other side. So this road is meant to link those two parts of the country together. But that means going through the mountains, and it means a huge amount of tunneling work. Tunneling work is technically very complex. Whereas in construction, you can often ask a firm to give you a solid design build turnkey style construction where you have a fixed price and a fixed time for delivery and everything is relatively well known, and the firm gives you that price and then delivers. For tunneling, that's just not possible because you never know what you're going to run into. And especially for big tunneling, if it's cut and cover where you blast out bits of the ground and then you cover it over and that makes your tunnel, that's easier. But in this case, we're going to have to take TBM, tunnel boring machines, which are those big shields that spin around and then you drive them through the mountain. That's what creates the tunnel. But if you hit different kinds of soil, either too wet or rock or granite or gravel, it requires different types of face plates, face shields for this tunneling. So the technical side gets really complex, and it's a very different. And so it's a bit like comparing building a parking garage, an above level parking garage, which is all civil works, relatively straightforward, to waste to energy or other types of waste disposal processing that requires much more technically sophisticated equipment and technologies. So underneath that question about technical viability are all these questions about the technology you're going to use, how it's going to be delivered. And PPP requires upfront analysis of that. And it saves you money over the long time. If you start the construction now and then work it out as you go, it costs you more money because the construction contractors love variations. I told you I used to be a lawyer. And when I started out, I was doing a lot of construction work and working for some contractors and some owners. and the construction contractors loved it when the owner had to come back and change the contract, change the scope of work. Because as soon as they changed the scope of work, that was more money for the contractor, and you could charge much higher margins because you weren't competing anymore. So the more you can define the project in advance, the cheaper, the better your price will be over the long term, right? So the final price may look cheaper when you're looking at public quick procurement, but the actual price when you're done with the project will be much better if you do your homework first and you let a project and you issue a contract for a project and you know exactly what you need. So we're asking all these different questions about social environmental issues, the financing and the financial viability of the project, legal, project structuring, etc. And then get everybody involved. And this we already talked about, so important. Talk to the community, talk to the different shareholders, the different parts of government. Don't ignore central government because you may need approvals from the environmental agency or the procurement authority or whoever, Ministry of Finance. Make sure that they're brought in early because you don't want surprises later. Talk to the community and not just telling them what's happening, which is important, but also listening. They will have good advice for you about what works and what doesn't in that community, about what's been tried before and what's worked and what hasn't, where to position things, all of those kind of things. You want that community as part of the project. The more they support the project, the more your project is likely to survive changes in government, changes in situation. With, in our current situation in COVID, everything is so vulnerable and so difficult. But if you've got a service that the community needs and that they've engaged with that service and they feel like they're part of that service, they feel like they're part of the solution, that's likely to survive this current economic crisis better than most. So make sure that you engage with all key stakeholders. Here's again, pre-construction, construction, operation, handback, all the different steps that you need to think about as a municipality. Don't forget the change in the need of your team. So you'll have a team of people who are focused on this project and making sure it comes through. They'll need a variety of skills, and we'll talk a little bit more about that on day 4. We're going to go through a whole thing about leadership and how to guide your team through this whole process, how to bring the right group of people together and empower them. But just realize that during these different phases, that team is going to need to change a little bit. The requirements of that team will shift. And so, for example, as you're doing your due diligence, a lot of that due diligence is going to be technical. So as you're doing your feasibility study, there are a lot of technical questions to be asked, and there's going to be a lot of engineering input. But there are also going to be important legal questions and important financial questions. And so having people in the team with the technical, but also the legal and financial expertise is going to be important. And you'll have consultants putting all this stuff together. You're going to need to be able to engage with the different parts of the consulting firm so that you can guide them and push them to give you the right solutions to what your requirements. And then you go through the procurement process, and then in pre-construction, the design, getting everything together, getting financing together, during construction, then during operation. The flavor of this team, the requirements of this team changes quite a bit during that time, and you'll need to adjust the team in order to fit with the requirements of the project. And this is a little bit more about the project implementation management. This is one that, to be honest, a lot of countries don't pay much attention to when they're preparing PPP, and it gets you in trouble later, obviously. The team that puts the project together, you'll have a group of consultants that will help you put the deal together. You get to commercial close, which is where you sign the contracts, and then financial close, which is where the banks sign off on everything. And so you've got all the financing and everything's ready to go. And then after that, your transaction advisors leave. Everybody, the whole team that was set up to do this procurement process is now exhausted because they've gone through the procurement process. But often they will be a specialized team in the middle of the municipality or supported by central government that then moves on to the next project. But that project then needs to be overseen, monitored, supported through the whole implementation process, which again requires a good understanding of PPP. So unlike a construction contract, when you have a problem with your PPP operator, you don't just send instructions. You need to sit down and work through with this partner how you respond to different changes, when issues come up, when complaints are launched or whatever. Not only do you need to be a little more collaborative when you work with them, but you also have somebody to help you. When your normal construction project and you get complaints from the community, you're on your own, right? The municipality has to deal with the complaints. But when you got a partner who's going to be operating this facility, you need to work with them, and together you resolve the issues with the complaints from the community. If there's a flood or something like that, with a normal construction project, the municipality generally has to deal with all of that, right? There's a flood, that's totally the municipality's deal. They have to solve the problem. May have insurance, or they may be self-insured, and then you've got to negotiate with the contractor, solve all those different problems, deal with the community impact. But if you've got a partner who's doing a PPP, then you've got somebody to work with you to resolve those issues where they relate to the service. So that relationship is completely different. And so not only the team that helps you do the feasibility study and the transaction advice and get the project through procurement and get it signed and sealed, you also need a team that can help implement and follow that project through. So invest in success, get the right people to do the right job. And actually, if you can read it, this is the actual advertisement of Ernest Shackleton, who was this great British explorer and did some amazing feats going out up to the North Pole on foot in a time where there was very little in the way of technology. They were, and you can read it, he says, for a hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. And you may feel that sometimes when you're developing your PPP project, right? This is not easy. It's a difficult, and it's totally new. It's changing the way you look at things. But if you can bring it through and you get a good partner that can help you deliver a service, that's huge. And you're bringing in private capital. You're doing a lot of really important things for the economy and for the municipality. But it can be difficult. And so getting the right group of people to help you drive this is really important. And if you as a municipality are going to do several projects, you may want to set up a dedicated team, because now as people gain these skills and learn about PPP, maybe they should all be sitting together, and so you can use them for the next project and the next project. And this is just walking through some what that capacity looks like. And so in addition to getting the right team and the right group together, you may also want to do some capacity development. So training up the rest of the municipal staff, helping them understand how these things work and why we're doing this crazy project, and why we want you to do more of these crazy projects, because actually the benefits, the opportunities are significant. And helping explain to people why. Okay, so a quiz for you. We'll see who gets on the chat fastest. You see the big sumo wrestler, and he's facing off against the little boy. This is your PPP contract negotiation. One of these two is the municipal authority, and one of these two is the private sector. Which one's which? I'll ask the question simply so it's easier to type. The big sumo wrestler, is he the municipal authority, or is he the private sector? No, you don't get to be silent on this one. Come on. Who's still awake? Has anybody stayed awake through my entire speech? Nobody. Not a single alive person. I don't mind sitting here until we get a response. I've got actually I haven't had a coffee yet this morning, so I could go make a coffee. And now you've got Anusha chasing you as well by WhatsApp.
There's a response in WhatsApp from Harif. The big is municipal.
Good. So that's a really interesting response, actually, because generally when I ask this question, the government authority thinks that the big guy is the private sector. Because often governments feel, especially when you have some of these big global players come to bid, if the big global player comes in to bid for your project, then they will come in with the lawyers and the bankers and all these people around the room, and everybody looks good, and they've all, you know, and it's overwhelming. It can be. And so a lot of government authorities think that the big guy is private sector because they've got the sophistication, the knowledge, access to those kind of resources. During negotiation, the government sometimes feel uncomfortable. But the other answer is that you're exactly right, that this big sumo guy is the government. Because from the private sector perspective, government can do anything. They change the rules tomorrow. They can take everything away tomorrow. They can make whatever decision they want to. And that makes the private sector nervous. So in an ideal world, we both realize that we have different perceptions of things, and we help the other understand better who we are and where we're coming from. And then this perception of big versus little is lost, because now we're both looking for a partner to deliver something, and it's more equalized, more balanced out. But whatever you do, this is sometimes how it feels. You're the guy rowing the boat, and you've got all these people yelling at you, giving you instructions. You'll have people from across government and across private sector and NGOs and the community and all kinds of groups yelling at you. So make sure that you get the resource, the support, the help that you need so that you can develop this project well. And that is the end of my very long talk. So let's move over to the panel session. Anusha, would you introduce us?
Yes, I would. Okay, our next program is a knowledge sharing session on experience in implementing municipal public-private partnership program. This session will be moderated by Jeffrey. And also joining this session are the panelists. First is Mr. Hazmi Yusof, Managing Director, Frost & Sullivan Malaysia Sdn Bhd. He is also the team leader for Frost & Sullivan Asia Pacific Emerging Market. He has been in the business advisory and consultation industry since 2001. His expertise lies in the business and market intelligence and business strategies, supervise the local and international project on smart cities initiative like Smart Selangor Blueprint, Smart Building Standards, Guideline, and market entry for Malaysia Smart City solution to other countries. Our second panelist is Madam Maimunah Jaffar. She is the director at Iskandar Regional Development Authority and leads the technology and innovation projects focusing on smart city and urban observatory. She leads the Smart City Iskandar Malaysia and Smart Selangor, and also Chief Smart City Officer for Johor Bahru in the Asian Smart City Network Program Alliance. She is an architect by professional and promotes sustainability and innovation in delivering her daily works in Iskandar Malaysia. Our final panelist is Mr. Abhijit Baumik, Public-Private Partnership and Infra Finance Consultant, Delhi. He has been working in the area of advisory service in infrastructure public-private partnership for over 2 decades. His focus has been in urban and municipal infrastructure projects, development, and financial structuring. He has worked on projects in India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Myanmar, Philippines, Kenya, and Tanzania. Now, I would like to welcome Mr. Jeffrey Delmon to moderate the session. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Anusha, and welcome to the panelists. I wonder if we could start out with just giving you each like 5 minutes to present yourselves, your experience, but also your experience with PPP projects, and sort of give everybody a sense of your background and some of the key things that you would like to discuss today. Thanks. And maybe we'll follow Anusha's guidance when she set out the panelists. We'll start with Hazmi and then Maimunah and Abhijit, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. A very good morning. Assalamualaikum to everyone on the call. My name is Hazmi, and I am with a firm called Frost & Sullivan. It is probably one of the oldest research intelligence firm out there. It was established in sometime probably 60 years ago or so. So in the industry, our nickname is the old lady of intelligence, because we've been around for donkey years. But specifically for smart city, I remember we started tracking smart city as a market way back in 2010, and I've seen how the evolution of smart city from starting off being a very technology vendor centric definition and initiative to now being very much a citizen centric initiative. So it is quite an interesting evolution from being something very techy, very fanciful, probably very expensive, to something which today I think the priorities tend to be solving urban challenges, and I think we are on the right track in terms of the definition of smart and smart city, because it's about leveraging technology to unlock capacity. The best example I can think of is our own cars. 20%, we only use our car maybe 20% of its lifetime. The rest of the time it's parked in the garage, right? So the essence of smart city and smart technology is to be able to leverage capacity in and around an urban area and use it for the greater good. So I think that's how the evolution of smart city in the last 10 years, in my opinion. So from my own perspective, I've started the journey very much with the state of Selangor, where we help the state plan smart state implementation. And I think today there are many initiatives the state of Selangor is doing, and I think it is quite an example to many other locations. They got like visitors from as far as even the UK coming in and visit the state for some of the initiatives. I also believe that some great smart city examples are actually in those cities in India, because when you have complex social urban solutions to manage, I think the learning curve, the experience is much better, and it's good to share with the other cities. I think good example is how Jakarta in Indonesia is managing their own challenges, their own urban challenges, using smart and using the smart city umbrella. So we've kind of had some small involvement in that as well. My experience with the municipalities is actually in autonomous zone region in Portugal. There's an island in Portugal called Madeira, where they wanted to kind of position that island as a big use case or a big what's the word for it? Living lab. That's a term called living lab, where it's an area where it's being, all this initiative being tested. So I went there and had to kind of roll out tackling different municipalities, different departments and ministers in that autonomous region in Portugal. And there's a lot of lessons learned. Some are difficult lessons, some are easy lessons, and there was a good mix. I think my fellow panel speakers, Abhijit and Puan Maimunah, has also, I'm sure they have a very hands-on experience in that as well. So I guess throughout this session, I will kind of like chip in wherever I can in terms of my experience, especially I think from my perspective, looking at initiatives and putting in a workable, successful business model when it comes to private and public partnership moving forward. So with that, I pass it back to you, Jeffrey. I hope I didn't exceed my 5 minutes.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. And Maimunah, can I hand over to you, please? I have to unmute.
Okay.
Perfect.
So thank you, Jeff, and good morning to all the viewers. My name is Maimunah Jaffar, and I'm currently with Iskandar Regional Development Authority down south in Malaysia, taking care of a region called Iskandar Malaysia. I think for viewers who are still not familiar with Iskandar Malaysia, we are at the southern of Johor, and with an area of 2217 kilometers square, and there are actually 5 local authorities or municipality in our region. So there are Majlis Bandaraya Johor Bahru, Iskandar Puteri, Pasir Gudang, Kulai, and as well at district level is Majlis Daerah Pontian. So for IRDA, we have actually started this ideation of smart city since year 2012, when at that time IRDA actually partnering with Mike presented the first smart city framework to the previous Prime Minister. And currently IRDA actually drive the Smart Johor initiative together with the Johor local government EXCO. And in Johor, we actually overseeing or looking at more Johor digital map, which actually the branding, the vertical, the dimension is actually the same. And under the ASEAN Smart City Network, I actually represented Johor Bahru as one of the 4 cities in Malaysia that has been selected as pilot, and also one of the 26 cities in the ASEAN region to actually embark on this smart city journey. So I think when looking at other ASEAN cities, I can say that Malaysian cities or Malaysian municipalities are much more advanced in other comparing to other cities in ASEAN, and of course we cannot compare with Singapore, Jeff. So our definition of smart city is that we should optimize digital technology and also data and insight actually to improve the quality of economy, social and environment. So as you know, previously I'm actually managing the planning and compliance, looking at the sustainability of Iskandar Malaysia. So I think we are currently at the phase of maturity of Iskandar Malaysia. So I've actually shifted myself from looking at sustainability towards technology and innovation. And I think to share with you, it's not an easy change. And I think these are the journey that all municipality has to embark. Together, we need to change from looking at sustainability, continue our sustainability, but advance ourselves in innovation and technology to actually look at how we can actually accelerate our sustainability agenda. So when we talk about PPP, in 2017, IRDA has actually embarked on smart city program with 5 local authorities residing in Iskandar, Malaysia. So in the program, IRDA actually assists our municipality to look at how they can also embark on this journey. So first thing that we are doing is actually identify their urban challenges. So to us, if you want to embark on a smart city program, you need to understand why you are doing it, which project that you need to do, and how you want to do it. So we identify their urban challenges, they prioritize their projects, and we actually engage the journey together with selected solution providers. So we explore opportunity, we let the solution providers to actually going through a pitching process. And I think at the end of the journey in year 2017, we realized that we learned a lot from that process. So as a result, in year 2018, each of the PBT actually has selected key project. So the idea is that when they completed their project, they will exchange between this PBT so that others can learn and they can move on together. I think the journey of smart city for the cities are learning together, learn together, and we move on together. So in this program, MBJB has actually selected a smart parking project. NBIP talks about smart city management. Pasir Gudang talk about smart energy. MPKU Kulai talk about smart traffic light. And our sister, which is Majlis Daerah Pontian, of course, they are a little bit away from the city. And of course, the main concern is actually infrastructure, internet connectivity. So of course, their project is about how they can actually improve their infrastructure. So I think Jeff also highlighted that you may need a complete team to do smart city. I just want to share some of the things that you need to be aware when doing smart city project. So for example, lesson learned, and I think I want to share with you some of our lesson learned. Doing smart city projects, construction or implementation wise might be the same, but the procurement is the one that you really need to understand and carefully go through. So for example, in the procurement process, we need to be aware of some licensing methods imposed by the vendors. I think when we first started to do this, we didn't realize that there are certain licensing that we need to pay. There is certain services that we need to for year in, year out. And there are also some IP issues. I think when we talk about smart city initiative, they are developing system, technology, and so forth. There are certain IP issues, especially when you are not developing system from scratch. So you need to understand that, because at the end of the day, the IP might not belong to you. It belongs to the vendor that you have actually hired to do your work. And I think, again, I mentioned about data. So a smart city, you need to associate yourself on how you harness data, you collect data, and then you use the data to actually help you to make an informed decision. But again, to tell you the truth, when we have all the data that we want, it's also not easy, because at certain time of period, you have to make sure that you have to safeguard your agency. So you cannot actually just collect the data and use it the way that you think that you are able to do. So PDPA is quite important. So however, this is actually, again, I want to mention a normal process of change. And I hope cities will not be taken aback and fear or don't want to go into it. And I think we should learn this together. And I think what Mai is doing is actually for us to understand the definition of smart city, what need to be taken care. And this is actually a journey that all of us can do by doing the project together. I think back to you, Jeff.
Great, thanks very much, Maimunah. And let me pass off to Abhijit.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Jeff. I'll probably just take the first 3 or 4 minutes on this chat, and I want to do it in 2 bits. One is to share with you a bit of my experience working with municipal governments in several countries, helping them identify and develop PPP projects to ultimately get that implemented, and probably give you 1 or 2 key learnings, if I may, from that. What is critical to actually get the private partner involved in projects? One of the important things that I may want to highlight right now is that most of my work on PPP with municipalities have been in meeting the infrastructure gap. And while meeting the infrastructure gap, put in elements which would make that infrastructure smart. So just to give you an example, I worked in cities that have had piped water supply connection of, let's say around 65, 70%. One of the first challenges of that city is to make sure that you get the piped water supply connection to 100%, that you get 100% sewerage connectivity to every household and every building. And then you put in, for instance, what is called a SCADA system that gives you online visibility sitting in a room of where leakages are happening, where something may go wrong, so that you're far more efficient in terms of the information that you're collecting on that infrastructure and then addressing that. So whenever I've kind of worked with municipal governments, I've often seen people focus on a particular project in terms of the construction element of it, in terms of we need to build pipes, or we need to put in pipes under the ground, or we need to build in a parking lot or something like that, as distinct from defining what is the service you want. What is the quality of service you want delivered? So for instance, if you want to look at a parking, we can't just say we want to look at a parking lot. We have to turn around and saying, okay, I want to look at a parking lot because I want the cars that are parked on the roads out into the parking lot, so there is no right-of-way blocking on the roads. 2, I want to start defining by saying there are X thousand cars that I want parked in this parking lot. 3, I want to say that it's easy for people to come in and park, which means during the, let's say, office peak hour times at 8 in the morning, there shouldn't be a wait time of more than 1 minute to find a parking spot or 2 minutes to find a parking spot. I need to put in an electronic, kind of a symbol which shows how many parking spots are available at what level, and so on and so forth. When I pay and exit, it should not take anybody more than 2 minutes. So when we are looking at infrastructure projects, and we're looking at infrastructure projects per se, whether PPP or otherwise, we need to start defining the project in terms of the goals and the service delivery. I end up spending quite a bit of time when I'm working with municipal governments to start pushing them to think about this across various infrastructure elements. So for instance, when you talk about water supply, it's not just about connectivity. It's really about, is it 24/7 water supply? Okay, if it is, what is the pressure you want to deliver? So is it 10-meter pressure? Is it 16-meter? What I mean by that is, without any pumps, would you deliver water at a height of what? So that people on the 3rd floor or the 4th floor or the 10th floor get the water. Do you want without any overhead tanks, underground tanks, so that visually the project looks? So I think one of the first challenges that I see on municipal infrastructure projects is defining a project far more from delivery of service parameters as distinct from physical infrastructure to be built. So that's really one. The second is really to try in and, to a certain extent, if I can use that word, break the apprehensions that many municipalities have of what a private sector will or will not do, or what their motivations are or not. There is enough. There are a huge number of municipalities that I've worked with where they believe that it's almost us versus them in terms of the municipality versus private. The private guy is coming in, he's not going to do what I'm asking him to do, he's going to cut every corner, he's going to try and make more money than he should be, and my citizens will suffer, and so on and so forth. That's usually the starting point in many projects. And that is, again, something that people like me spend a fair amount of time trying to really say, okay, if you're worried about that, the way around is how well can we define the project? How well can we define the deliverables? How well can we monitor the output to make sure that what you're looking for is delivered? And then the private sector still, after delivering that, has, of course, he has a profit motive, and still ends up making the money. But again, this us versus them challenge from a perspective point of view is something that one needs to tackle often. And just the third one before I hand it over to Jeff that I wanted to talk about is whenever you're looking at undertaking PPP projects, as Jeff's presentation talked about earlier today and even a couple of days back, was really that the process is pretty arduous. It's a long process. It's far more complex than if the government just spent its money and got a contractor in to build whatever they want to build. For municipal governments to go through that arduous process at a very senior level, you need a champion for a project. You need somebody who is really pushing that project and saying, okay, this is what I want to build. This is what's going to change the face of my city. This is very important for my city and the citizens. And I am going to really back this. And when a senior person says that, it's not only backing his team in the municipality that's working, it's backing the project concept, it's addressing all the challenges that will come up from some citizens, some affected people, central governments, provincial governments, development authorities. Everybody will have tons of questions. Everybody will challenge it. I've seen many projects in various countries that go to courts because somebody will, take a legal action and try and get us, stay against you implementing the project. So all of those need to be fought. So over a, 9-month, 1 year, 1.5 year period, depending on the kind of project, there are several challenges that will come in trying to stop the project. If nothing else, there will be, some social community organizations that will challenge the fact that you're getting a private sector to come and deliver a project. Chances are the tariff is going to be very high, and they will start objecting to something like that. So you need a very, very strong commitment right from the top within a municipal government to be able to drive any significant change, but definitely for PPP projects. But with those opening remarks, Jeff, I think I've done probably more than my 5 minutes. So over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Abhijit. Can I go back to Hazmi and Maimunah and ask you about what's been your experience with partnerships in order to drive smart cities? And we're talking about all this great technology, and there was discussion of the licensing and the IP issues, and those are definitely challenging. How do you create? What would be your guidance to municipalities looking to create partnerships with providers of that knowledge, of those innovations, of that, the drivers of smart cities? How do you create those partnerships? Let me start with Maimunah this time.
Yeah, I think for Iskandar Malaysia, we realized that most of our projects are actually private driven. Yeah. So if you can see in a normal situation, if you want to build roads or you want to do bridges or something like that, some of them are actually a private driven project. So I think for Iskandar Malaysia itself, when we look at working together with the solution provider, they can actually offer services related to digital and emerging technologies, and these potential players can be either the current telecommunication companies. I mean, I should not mention their name, you should know who, but they can also be computer, ICT related companies that have the subject matter expert. And the good thing is that if you realize that in the last budget or Malaysian plan, the government has actually put emphasis on how technology, emerging technology, innovation can actually drive the economy in Malaysia. So I guess with that direction, federal level direction, some of this company has also changed their scope from being the normal telecommunication or being the normal supplier of computer, laptops, and so forth. They are also changing the way that they organize their company to look at smart city. So I think you must, the viewers must have encounter many of these type of companies that actually wants to do smart city related initiative. And I think with the direction from federal itself, even when we talk about banks, there are many banks that can actually make smart city projects bankable. And I think in the last maybe 6 to 7 years, it is very difficult to get green infrastructure on the ground because support from federal is not there. And when they do feasibility study, they are not able to prove that emerging technology can actually be bankable. And when I look at these matters, I just want to share that I think Jeff already mentioned in a lengthy way the process of PPP project. But I just want to share on a simpler way that you can do PPP that maybe you even have thought to doing it, but not able to do. So I'm talking about a smaller project. So when you want to embark into smart city project, you first have to identify what is your urban challenges. And secondly, maybe you want to do a baby step on this project so that you learn before you embark on higher risk projects such as waste to energy, grey water plant, and so forth. So let's look back at that smaller project. So what I've learned actually, if you want to do a smaller project, some of this company can actually bring in self-sustained business model. So maybe some of them has approached you, and yes, there is no upfront cost at all. Yeah. So projects are very self-funded from the saving that derive from before and after implementation. And I think such project, I mean, if you have actually do it, can be solar power, LED lighting, and so forth. So this is a good small project that you can start to embark on in your smart city journey. Second is actually the cost sharing model. So there are many solution providers actually provide the system or the application, and actually municipal role is actually to market for the product that they have actually developed. And you promote the system, and at the end of the day, the payment to the solution provider can be taken from the consumer. So this is like a cost sharing. And I think you can do this when you look at smart parking and other e-payment. And I think, to tell you the truth, the apps provider actually don't make money from the small money that they get from the parking. But using technology, using mobile, they actually get money from the advertisement that they can derive from the application that they develop. And thirdly is actually the higher risk project. I think Jeff mentioned about the process of how you actually need to go through certain feasibility and so forth. So I think for such project, you may want to find private sector as partner. And this is actually not new to Malaysia. So for example, you have a PPP project for hospital. It's more like a design, build, and maintenance part of project. So you might want to work together with a contractor or a consortium, look at maybe things that related to municipality, for example, like garbage, for example. Maybe you want to do a waste to energy. So you can actually work on this, and this can become like a long-term PPP project, similar to one that I mentioned as hospital. You know, many hospitals in Malaysia has been built through PPP, and also university. But of course, you need to give certain commitments, certain bond and guarantees to be in place. So I think, Jeff, this is something that municipality can think about, from the smaller project to the higher risk project. I think these are the things that I've actually developed or do with some of the municipality in our local area. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Maimunah. Hazmi, what's been your experience?
Okay, I wanted to project a slide, but I'm having a bit of trouble sharing my content, but never mind. I think just to kind of bounce off what Abhijit mentioned earlier, I think when the municipality has the the understanding, the 360-degree understanding of what it wants to do, its kind of outcomes. I think that is the first checklist in terms of doing a successful PPP. Because when you look at the elements of a successful project, I think first of all it's about understanding and measuring the impact of the project to the citizens or to the locality itself. So that's very important, because you don't want to embark into a project where the citizens doesn't feel it or doesn't know that there's even that ongoing project. So the citizen have to feel the impact of the project. I think obviously working with private sector, you must make sure that this private entity is also making money, because without that, partnership will not be sustainable. So the business model, the return on investment is something that the partners, the municipalities, the private sector has to really go, really study line by line, like what Maimunah mentioned. If you miss out a few costing like licenses, intellectual property and so on, that could prove costly to either party. And I think the basic tenets of a successful partnership is for both parties to have a win-win outcome.
Interesting, and thank you. And what do you do with new technology? Because Maimunah mentioned this, and it's tricky, right? Because then your typical bank doesn't want to take the risk of new technology. How do you share that or deal with it between the municipality and the service provider?
I think if you look at, I think new technology, well, it's kind of one dimension to look at things, just to look at the technology itself. I think you got to look at the overall picture, which means it's the technology plus the business model that it enables. So I think today, most at the city level, the primary focus is a technology that enables data to be collected. I think data is the key currency moving forward for a successful PPP, right? Because I think if you look at maybe Abhijit can maybe argue with me. If you look at all the many PPP initiatives, the real ROI comes from the fact that the private party or the private sector party actually are able to gather those data as well. So it's not the revenue transaction from the PPP, but the data gathered by the PPP part or the parties. So I think that is from our research of various smart cities around the world, we are seeing that trajectory where private sectors are partnering with local governments because they want to also have that data.
That's interesting, and maybe I could hand this over to Abhijit then, because it's really interesting, these kind of projects where the currency is advertising revenues and data. It's not really the service that they're delivering, which creates some interesting challenges and opportunities, right? The service itself doesn't need to then become really expensive, because that's not where we're looking for revenues. But as a municipality, we need to think about what is that advertising, and then that reflects on us as a municipality. Where does that data and how much do you allow private sector control and get access to, et cetera? Abhijit, any thought on this or further advice from you?
So I'm going to expand that question a bit, really saying, looking at innovative revenue sources. And that's true at both levels for specific projects as well as municipality as a whole. So an interesting example that I think Maimunah talked about was a street lighting project. Now that project has two kind of a twin cutting or two aspects to it. One, of course, is the pure cost saving, right? So clearly a lot of companies that are called ESCOs or energy saving companies, that will come and saying, okay, I would change all the street lights across the entire city, and your electricity bill will still be lower, and therefore there is a saving. Of course, Jeff and I were once in a municipality in somewhere in Africa where the municipality never paid its electricity bill. So in those kind of municipalities, it will not help. But otherwise, there is cost saving from that. The second interesting one is the city gets the benefit of safety. You actually come in and saying there are probably another 500 streetlights that are required across the city to make it a safer and a better lit city. So there is that advantage. And third, there are cities and projects that I know who have actually made reasonable revenue from the advertising that you can actually put on the poles or the streetlight poles. So again, those are the kind of three aspects that people look at when you do a street lighting project. Similarly, I mean, you can take this and make it as complex on looking at innovative revenue streams as you want. So there was a BRTS project, a bus rapid transit system project in a city that I'd worked on, where clearly the revenues of the project were not enough to be able to justify that entire project. And we were looking at what other innovative revenue sources can we actually bring in. And in discussions with the citizens, the stakeholders, the professionals in the city, and we did a few of these, what we call kind of general brainstorming sessions in groups of 50 people, and looking for ideas on the project and how to make it work. And one of the things that we came up with was that for all the residences and offices within, I think we finally ended up at 75 meters. It was between 50 meter and 100 meter, but 75 meters on either side of where we were implementing the BRTS project, they were getting far more benefit than rest of the city where the BRTS project were not getting implemented. So can we look at a small surcharge on top of the property tax that they were paying to come into this project and then make that project feasible, viable, etc. And that honestly was pretty well received, because for 75 meters of those houses, etc., they were using the BRT system far more than the rest of the city, because it was far more accessible to them. And as the municipal government, you were improving the infrastructure significantly for that area. So there are several innovative revenue sources that specific projects will throw up. We've even done a fair amount of work where municipal governments have called us in and saying, look at my own financials, because a lot of municipalities struggle with their fiscal balance. The revenues are almost never enough for the services that they actually deliver. And we've gone into cities and looked at all their revenue sources and actually look at how can you, find new sources, but more importantly, how can you improve billing and collection. And there are cities that I have worked on bringing in a private sector entity and doing a PPP on municipal revenues, which is just helping a municipality with billing, with collection, with following up through technology, WhatsApp messages, emails, etc. Your bill's pending, you have to pay your water bill in 5 days, and you have to pay this bill, just that whole process, and making it far more convenient for people to pay through technology. I mean, right from your phone with one click pay. All of these have actually helped, and I won't name the municipality, but it actually improved collection from something like 67% to 94 or 95% within a period of 9 months. And that itself gave the municipality so much more revenues to be able to improve and deliver on their services. Now, that was again a PPP. It gave a contract to a private company to do this entire process. No disconnection rights were given to the private company, so they weren't going and disconnecting anybody. But just through this whole process of following up, and making things easier in terms of collection, and the private company charged a reasonably small fixed fee, and they were really getting a share of the incremental revenue that came in. So it was also an interesting revenue share or an incremental revenue share model where the municipality wasn't paying a bomb, not knowing what was going to come back in terms of that. Just one final other area that I wanted to touch on. Very often when municipality comes in and wants to do a new project, and deliver better services, there is always, or sometimes, there is an incremental charge that users would have to pay, that citizens would have to pay. The tariff may go up or the charge may go up a bit. And that always worries municipal officials, far more the elected municipal officials than the bureaucratic municipal officials. They're far more worried about increasing user charges. Survey, there is this something called the willingness to pay survey that you always do when you look at introducing a new service or improving a service, to check with citizens how much are they willing to pay. For instance, for 24/7 10-meter water supply in a particular area that today is getting water supplied through tankers, or getting intermittent water supply. They only get it for 2 hours a day or something like that. Almost all of them come back by saying, if you give us the service that you're promising, we are willing to pay more, and we are willing to pay, whatever that number is. And we always advise municipalities that you may want to start increasing the user tariff after the citizens have seen the benefit and seen the better service. That also builds credibility. You start providing the better service and then look at saying, okay, listen, you can see the visible difference in the improvement in service, the improvement in the quality of service. And by the way, I'm increasing your tariff by, whatever, X%. Is a far better way of going and making some of these projects financially workable, rather than saying upfront you increase the tariff and then start providing the service. You always end up having people at your doors banging and strikes and so on and so forth. So Jeff, over to you. Thanks.
Yeah, it reminds me of that was the project in Cochabamba in Bolivia, and they had this massive, they wanted to build a dam and redo the water system, and it was all great, and the plans were fantastic, and everybody's excited, but they decided that in order to get the money, they would start charging high fees now. And the service then was terrible. And all of a sudden, people were paying twice as much for a really bad service. And of course, the people it into the streets, and it was a total mess. One of the questions came up on the chat. We've been talking about projects that generate new kinds of revenues, and those are all great, and they're really good to think creatively about how to generate those revenues, how to capture them, and how to use them. What about projects that just don't generate revenues? They generate benefits, they're huge impact, but revenues, no. And so the example was raised about an open dump site, and you want to turn it in, it obviously threatens the water table and all kinds of different problems. And you want to turn it into a modern, high-tech sanitary landfill with, maybe with waste to energy, so that we treat the waste properly, and composting and recycling and all these great things, all of which is wonderful. But some of that creates revenues, but generally not enough to pay for the underlying project. What do you do with that? And let's see, how do we start on this one? Let me start, Abhijit, let me start with you. So we'll go in reverse order.
So you're right. I mean, there will be the project that you talk about. I mean, yes, some of the output of the treatment facilities, whether you do electricity or you do compost or you do, reuse derived fuel, RDF, which can be sold to, boilers as low calorific coal or something like that. Those have revenue sources, but more often than not, that is not adequate to make the whole project viable. Both the treatment plant and the scientific sanitary landfill site, both of them don't work. There are 2 ways or 3 ways that, I mean, clearly the health benefits are enormous. So, there is this difference between economic returns and financial returns. So if you look at the economic returns, then you clearly have the municipal government will have high economic returns, because economists will show you, and I'm not one, but economists will show you that the health benefits that you will get from there as a city and as a country, that will reduce, the health costs will go down because your pollution levels in a city are going down, etc. Right? So that's the economic benefit. Financially, straight away, like Jeff said, there isn't a 1:1 revenue. There are municipalities that charge a fee from each household for collection of the waste, the primary collection of the waste. And that doesn't necessarily, 100% of it doesn't necessarily go to defray the cost of primary collection, but it also goes towards secondary collection, transportation, landfill, and so on and so forth. So that is, of course, one way of getting some revenue allocated for this expense. The other is some municipalities that I've seen add a certain surcharge on property tax, because everybody is paying property tax within a city for their properties, or and you put a small surcharge on top of that towards let's say municipal solid waste management. So that is the other way of getting fee, which is really that there is better service that I'm providing. And if neither of them seem to work in your particular municipal case, it has to be the larger pot of revenue of the municipality that pays for it. There isn't any more magic that we can do with it if there isn't any other alternative source. By the way, an interesting project that I've seen, this is in a city in India, where there was a sanitary landfill site that actually finished its life, as it were. It got full, and they converted it into a public park. So I've been to that park, and when you stand on the park, it's a beautiful park. When you stand on the park, if nobody tells you this is on top of a landfill site, you'll never figure it out. It's lovely, it's beautiful. The minute they tell you it's on top of the landfill, you want to run away. But otherwise, it's and it became quite a nice area for the kids to come in, play in the evening, and generally a place for the city to also get the green breathing space and open space and so on and so forth. So there are some uses even at the end of the sanitary landfill site's life. Jeff?
Great. Thanks very much, Abhijit. And Maimunah, what's been your experience? Are you still on mute?
Okay. So for municipality, if you might have certain projects that don't make money for you, but I think you need to think about reevaluate back your productivity. For example, there are certain projects that you initiate, but it will provide less time of your staff to do enforcement. For example, let me relate to a project that we have developed locally with DOE, Department of Environment, the Irrigation Department, as well as 3 local authorities. And this project is about river monitoring management of Sungai Skudai. Why I want to highlight this is that, of course, you don't make money out of this project, but of course, it benefits the community who lives along the river so that you can better clean and do enforcement. But at the same time, if you calculate back the amount of time that you are going to do enforcement or are you going to do sampling versus if you can have a ready spatial data to actually identify where are the hotspot areas, what are the main contribution to the pollution. So in this project, we identify all of that. So Sungai Skudai is a 47-kilometer length, and it falls under 3 local municipality, which is Kulai, Iskandar Puteri, and also Johor Bahru. So you can imagine within this 47 kilometer, if we don't have a good data and analytics to really understand within this 47 kilometer length of river, where is actually the source of pollution? Where are the area that you should go and make enforcement? Then I don't think the agency locally will be able to spend much time to go and look at the area in a more holistic and strategic manner. So I think if you convert that to the productivity time, I think you are actually have a saving cost on your resources so that your resources can actually go and focus on certain area that we have already identified and then roll out actions that is focused on that area only. So I think we should look this at a different angle, Jeff, not just monetary, but the value of the resources that you have can be spent to do certain focus area than just going around without knowing where to go. So I think that is actually our true experience there. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I completely agree. It's often and it's sometimes tempting to use new technology just because it's new technology, but you've got to do that assessment, right? Is this really going to help us? How's this going to help us? What are we going to get out of it?
Yeah.
And sometimes you can adjust as you're thinking about that. You realize that the technology can provide additional things that you hadn't really thought about before, and by a little bit of a tweak, you can expand the project in order to address these other issues at the same time. Sorry, so Hazmi, would you mind chiming in? What has been your experience?
Yeah, I think just to continue from what Abhijit and what Maimunah mentioned, I think it's important to look at things in a more holistic way. Just to paraphrase what Maimunah, examine the value chain. So if you're looking at waste, you got to look at from where the waste is created from the source up until the dumping site, and to understand where can a smart, I wouldn't even say technology, but a smart approach can maybe at one point reduce the need to separate waste, for example, to creating a waste recycling plant that is may be profitable in the long term. I'll give you an example. When you look at the state of Selangor, let's say 15 years ago, the challenge was that waste are also thrown out in rivers along the way. So there's a lot of illegal dumping ground, and by just tackling that, by eliminating illegal dumping ground, it has a big impact in terms of public health and the environment, and that I think the state government put things as simple as CCTV types of monitoring. But again, I think from my own experience, some projects or initiative, you have to look at a more of a concession business model, meaning when you appoint a private party, you will have to give them an exclusive and also a longer term, so that they are able to get their investment in the end, a positive ROI in the end. Secondly, I see that it's good to partner with a government-linked company when it comes to solutions like this, because I think what government should avoid is to get involved in because I think the challenge for governments is that there is already so many things on their plate, so for them to execute one more initiative, I think it's long-term wise they'll be inundated with with work, and less so in terms of the work of governance. So I think they will have to look at business models that would bring in a third party in. Maybe it could be a private company, it could be a government-linked company, and work around to make the business model work for that third party. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And let me hand off to one last question, which I thought was really interesting. Bridging off of Abhijit's comment about a champion, right? If you want a good project, especially big or complex or difficult, you need a champion to drive the project through. The question is, that's great, but do we really need the politicians? Can't we just avoid the politicians and work with government staff in order to deliver projects? Why are politicians important, and are they important? And on that extremely easy, not politically sensitive question, let me start with Hazmi.
Oh, okay. In every project that I worked on, there is an element of the politicians being involved and so on. So yeah, sometimes you can't just avoid that. But I think what has helped sustaining and a smart city initiative in the long term is actually, as Abhijit put it succinctly, a champion. And I see, if you take the state of Selangor, you have a smart city authority. If you look at Iskandar and Johor, you have Puan Maimunah, who's partly the champion. You look at Sarawak, you also have, Kuching, you also have the I think the Sarawak, the SMA, Sarawak Multimedia Authorities. So, and they kind of cut across, municipalities and kind of have that overarching subject matter champion. So I think, so I think that is key, because in my experience as well, elected politicians, for example, they also come and go. And with a smart city authority, there is a level of continuation. I've seen an experience. Yeah.
Good. So, but with an authority that is a standing body that sort of has that capacity and resource. So it's not just a champion, but it's actually integrated into the infrastructure of the city, so to speak. Is that good?
Yes. If you look at the authorities here, for example, I think the ultimate authority, it's still the municipality, right? They have the ability to even reject certain initiative they don't deem as good for them. But I think working with these authorities, they are able to lessen the work needed. So the authority would work with the federal level, the authority would work the state level, and they become the catalyst, so to speak. However, it requires.
So you say, however, it requires.
Jeff, I think there's an audience want to ask question while. Okay, Shah Iqbal.
Wait, sorry, we haven't finished with this question.
Oh yeah. Can you hold first, Shah? Okay.
Because we were going to turn the question over to Maimunah, the difficult question, and as an actual champion, she can tell us what it's like at the top, what it's like to be a champion. Do we really need those pesky politicians?
Hazmi, I think you carry on first.
So I'm done. So over to you, Puan Maimunah. That's the question.
So actually, I think to have a successful smart city projects, you need both. You need top down as well as bottom up, because in our experience, we need that policy direction from the top, so that the people down there can actually receive and roll out. But without the bottom up approach, the people down there will not be able to know what to do. And our experience in working with talking to many municipalities, even in Malaysia and ASEAN, we realized that the most important thing about doing this smart city is the readiness of the municipality. I mean, if the top direction also backing for people to do, but if at the municipality level they are not ready, then it will be very difficult. And readiness actually cover two. One is the infrastructure, and the other one is resources. And I know that there are many municipalities that do not have access to fast and reliable internet connectivity. Because just now I mentioned about smart city, you have a product, you have to harness data. And this data needs to actually integrate and collect it at one platform. But this is also about change. Some of the resources that are residing within municipality are still having fear in embarking in the technology journey. So there are certain mindset change that perhaps the bottom up need to be done, so that these people can embrace the technology that perhaps the Datuk Bandar or the YDP wants to bring in. So the other part that is required is actually that capacity building. Yeah, and I think just to mention that even if you ask me the top 3 key challenges, the first one is actually leadership. Understanding what is smart city, how to choose the project, how to prioritize the project. Because I think in Malaysia, we are getting into the symptom that, oh, that city have that, maybe we should do that. That city have this, maybe we should do this. So I'm afraid that we are actually overwhelmed with the product that the solution providers are bringing in without understanding whether do we actually need that product. So again, understand your urban challenge, do prioritize your project based on the product that you think can improve your urban challenge. And I think again, leadership, Jeff. You need a good leadership to drive this initiative. Yeah, back to you.
So even the politicians as well. Huh? Of
Oh.
course, I'm just
Cannot
teasing,
do this.
absolutely. No, it's
Cannot
very
do
funny, right?
this.
There's often this perception of us and them and different, and there are different dynamics, but
Yeah.
that's the way it is, right? Politics is politics, and
Politics to do policy direction,
yep.
but policy enough is not enough. Yeah.
So
Okay.
excellent. I like that. Very nice. Abhijit, we've got another question coming in. Anything you wanted to say, or
yeah, just on the quick half a minute on my experience with working with politicians on project. There are two things that they bring to the table, which is amazing, which the rest of the municipal staff don't bring. One is their proximity, particularly at the city level politicians who are mayors and the elected representatives. They bring in an amazingly good understanding of what the citizen and what the users really want, what will work and what will not work. They've all worked at the ground level, and they bring in a very, very good understanding. So if the municipality is designing a project that's quite esoteric, you will get very quick feedback of why that may not work or what needs to get changed. The second thing that's an amazingly useful role that they play is also on communication to the citizens, to communication to the city at large. When you want to take a project and you want to take it to the citizens in terms of telling them what we're looking at doing, the reason why, the benefits, and so on and so forth. Again, from there, being in touch with each one of them and going out and telling their story within their constituency, amazingly effective. So very early on, once we have the project configuration in place, more often than not, I end up doing a presentation of the project first to all the elected representatives, so they carry the story, bring them on. You want all stakeholders involved, and they're a very important stakeholder. You want to get them, and they're influencers, so they go back to their constituency and tell that story. So just wanted to add that point.
Excellent. That's great. And I really like this idea of we all have different strengths, different skills, different roles, and together those roles within the city need to be brought together, bottom up, top down, in order to bring the solution. I think that's fantastic. Anusha, who did you have who wanted to ask a question?
Actually, Iqbal. Basically, his question was number 3. Sorry, number 4. Number 4 and number 5 is his question.
Okay, so number 4 I answered on the chat.
Yeah.
There's
Number
not
5.
really a database or website where we get all different case studies with financial models. So there are two, the Municipal PPP framework that we sent around has over 100 examples of projects, gives you some of the lessons learned, strengths and failures and strengths, but it does not have financial models. And the financial models are a little bit tricky because you tend to have, the government will have its own financial model, the private sector will have its own financial model, and the government may set up a financial model that synthesizes what they think the bid financial models will look like. But those tend to be things that you keep to yourself. You don't share them around. And so they're not readily available. So we don't really have a compilation of financial models. That's 4 and 5. Non-monetary, yeah, and we've talked a lot about return on investment, and I guess maybe a question for the panel, and I think this sort of feeds into a number of different things that you guys have already said about important indicators for these kind of projects. How do you tell? I mean, we've got ROI, and that's fine, and that's monetary and financial. That doesn't really capture the value for the city, the value of the project. How do you value a project? How do you figure out what it's worth, whether we should do it, all that good stuff? And the theory sounds great. We can talk about it, blah, 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 and we can convince each other. Is there a quantitative way of assessing projects? Let's see, which side we started with? Hazmi last time, then Abhijit. Why don't we start with Maimunah and then go to Abhijit and Hazmi, please?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And that's why when we do project, we always have to remember that we should harness data as well. And how do we evaluate? I think most of us are familiar with SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, and there are 17 of them. And in a way that at the end of the day, you should be able to measure your outcome and whether your project actually meet the indicator that has been outlined in the SDG. And for cities in Malaysia, I think most of us are quite aware how SDG has actually helped to prepare yourself when you do your policy for your city. And I think when we talk about SDG as well, we look at sustainable development way back in year 1996. Yeah. So at that time, people also are not familiar with it. And it became the basis to prepare our 6th Malaysia plan. So that's how long ago that we talk about sustainability. And of course, we would not know whether are we being successfully in developing project under sustainable development unless we have the baseline. Yeah. So when we have the baseline, we collect the data, then we know where is our status comparative to other cities in Malaysia as well as cities in the world. So there might not be a monetary value, but the value that you be able to get for your city to understand that you are actually creating a livable city for your citizen, for your stakeholder. And that value will not be able to measure unless you have your baseline and then you keep track and monitor where is your outcome in the end of the day. So I think that value is very intangible, but this is what we've been doing actually in Malaysia. And I think in the way forward, that's why when we talk about urban observatory, that is one of the function that the urban observatory that we are developing for Iskandar Malaysia, that would be the function and role of that urban observatory, the intangible value of the city. Yeah.
Excellent, interesting. Baseline intangibles.
Yeah.
Abhijit.
Two quick comments, Jeff. One is there is, just like you do financial models, which is on capex, which is the cost of the construction of the project, operating expenses, maintenance expenses, revenue, etc. And you have a financial model, and you have what is called a financial IRR, financial internal rate of return. Similarly, for most projects, definitely all projects that the World Bank would finance, for instance, and any of the other larger financial institutions will finance, and it's actually a mandate in a lot of governments, you have to also calculate the economic internal rate of return. And the economic internal rate of return goes beyond financials. So it goes into some of the elements that you are talking about, which is how has it impacted health? And to try and put a number to that, so have health costs in the city actually overall come down, have which could be because of lower pollution levels, which could be better water quality, which could be more wastewater getting treated, which could be a more sanitary landfill site. etc., etc. That would be one. Saving in time, for instance, of people, more man days of work because you're not going to the hospital or not ill that often, and so on and so forth. So there are econometric models that actually do that and put a number to what we are trying to call intangibles by looking at what the benefits of that are to people and to a city. So that's one, that there are those models, and for any project that you want to look at, you can actually build that. The second comment, and I want to take it a little further from where Maimunah referred to, which is really to look at the baseline. I've actually recently, last year, actually worked on a project where for a province in China, which is one of the most highly polluting provinces, and they were very worried about it. It generated close to 50% of all coal-based power of China. So it was huge and very polluted. So we actually set up a green fund, which would finance projects that brought pollution levels down in that state. And the money was raised from multilateral institutions who actually gave an incentive. So we did a baseline calculation of the CO2 emissions, which is the greenhouse gas emissions, baseline before this project was done. And every year you actually have targets on what is the reduction that you've actually achieved, project by project, and all of the projects that this fund actually finances. And there is an incentive built in. If you reduce more than X tons of carbon emission every year, the Green Climate Fund, which is a participant in this fund, will actually give you more money at a lower interest cost. So there is a straight financial benefit built into getting the city to be, in fact, it was the whole province, but province to be more livable. So there are some really interesting projects that I believe, I'm not involved. This is something till the setting up of the fund, but I believe that are coming in. For instance, a whole city has converted its entire transportation system to electricity operated. So there are wires, and that electricity is getting generated through a solar power plant just outside the city. So the entire city's public transportation is zero carbon emission. It's renewable energy, 100% electricity. There's not a single diesel bus running anymore, and that's it. Now, those are, you give the cities incentives, and cities will come up with amazingly innovative projects, which are based on livability, which are based on sustainability.
Great, thanks very much, Abhijit. Hazmi, over to you.
Yeah, I think this is something that my employer, my company, Frost & Sullivan, does for a living. So what we do is when there's a project rollout, after certain time we come back in and actually measure the impact. So it's economic impact, social economic impact, directly social impact, and in some cases environmental impact on that initiative, and we tend to track it from time to time to see whether in the longer term this initiative is actually worth the investment. So sometimes a direct monetary ROI may not be the benchmark, but these other assessment such as the socio-economic assessment. So I think this is something which we see important in the long term, because I think one of the challenges of any kind of initiative, and we see it with Bangkok with their one thing is called the 1,000 Eyes initiative to fight crime. When there is no support from the government and the ROI is poor, it will die off within the next 3 years. So it's important to measure those impact to see whether, okay, this is impactful, let's continue this, or after a year you can say, okay, let's pull the plug, because I think there must be room for trial and error as well. So yes, so coming back to that, look at apply an impact assessment to the various initiatives. I'll post a link, a URL link that so the participants can refer to, taking Selangor as an example of that. So just check out the chat notice board.
Excellent. And that answers a question we just got online about, please give us an example of an economic internal rate of return. So that'd be really interesting to see, you know, a worked example of how you do that assessment and what that looks like. So that's great. I'm realizing we're just past the 2-hour mark, and our poor panel was only meant to be with us for like 20 minutes, and we've stretched them out to an hour. So just want to thank you guys so much for your patience and sharing all of your experience and your wisdom on these topics. It's a really, really interesting space. So that's fantastic. And we've got a couple more questions on that we got online. One is about, anyway, I'm going to reserve those for our next session, which is next Thursday. In particular, a couple of them aren't necessarily in the wheelhouse of our current panel. But let me push those off till next Thursday. We've got a bit of time to talk about a bit more about leadership and leadership around PPP, what that looks like, and some of the qualities and facilities that you may want to set up within the municipality to help you achieve your goals. And then we'll capture a bit more following from this discussion about your municipalities. What's missing? What would you like to develop? What are your ideas? What are your biggest challenges? And we'll try to turn the microphone back over to the participants so we can hear a bit more from you about what you're experiencing at the moment. And don't forget, you'll get your test at the end of next week, which you'll be able to take home and do by yourself, no cheating. And then we just we'll send it in then. But again, thank you very much to our panelists. Fantastic job. And a big virtual round of applause.
So thank the host, very well moderated. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I hope it was very knowledgeable and fruitful. And for the participant, we'll see you on Thursday, on 16 July, same time, 10 a.m. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.